Can you hear me? Okay, you can hear me online? Great. Okay. Wait. Bye.
I'm not hearing anything from you, Scott.
Yes, we can hear you, Scott.
Great. So sorry for everyone that for the late start. Unfortunately, I'm having some technical problems here. I wasn't able to connect into the live meeting, and but now I am. So apologies again. For those of you that have done one of these chats before, the format is unplugged, which basically means I don't have a set presentation. Instead, look to you guys to actually ask questions, and we'll kind of make a talk up along the way. There's a Q&A tab at the top that you can click, which gives you ability to submit any question you want, and I'll try to answer as many of them as I can over the next 90 minutes or so. So with that, fire away.
Okay, Scott, can we do a sound test with you, please?
Can you not hear me right now?
Your icon at times flash a bit with sound, but nothing. I can't hear anything.
Are you not hearing me right now?
I can hear you, Scott. You're fine. And our members, the people who are logged in, can. I think it's just a localized problem with Brian.
Other people hear me?
Okay, I think we just hand over to Scott Guthrie. Thank you, Scott, for attending. And thank you for coming in here again. This is your 10th time. I'm going to hand over to you because I can't hear you at the moment. So over to you, Scott.
Yep, we've got good sound. Go for it.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Again, if you hadn't heard me earlier, this is an unplugged chat, which basically means you can ask anything over the next 90 minutes, and I will try to answer as many as possible, and hopefully make it kind of unstructured. So again, you can use the Q&A tab at the top, and basically fire away questions. They'll show up in my little presenter list. What I usually do when I try to answer questions is I'll try to answer a group of them together, so that that way I'll try to hit a couple in a single area. So if I don't answer your question immediately, don't worry. Chances are I will probably come back and answer that as well. So let's see. Someone asked if Scott's is ASP.NET's daddy, then whose is the mom? I don't know. But thank you, I guess. So other questions. So a couple of people have asked questions around Silverlight, and a couple of those ones first. So Rick asked the question, what are the future plans for Silverlight? Josh asked the question, my team uses Silverlight for web-based software. You asked what's the Destiny, and a few other ones there. So at a high level, hopefully you saw that Silverlight 5 was shipped a little over a month and a half ago, the beginning of December, and is a pretty major release. Has a bunch of great new capabilities, 64-bit, 32-bit, works on all browsers, cross-platform with Mac and Windows, and we think it has a bunch of great features in it. And so, I think the last Lidnug session, people asked me, when is it shipping? Is it still on track? Is it going to support all those browsers? So hopefully the answer that you saw is yes. It supported all those things. And we think it's a really good release. In terms of kind of what the published roadmap is beyond it, right now there isn't one. We haven't historically actually published roadmaps with Silverlight. Usually we do kind of the beta and the RTM release. And so we don't right now have a published roadmap for it. I actually candidly don't run the team anymore. And haven't actually for about 9 months. So I don't want to speak on behalf of the team in terms of where it's going. But we think the Silverlight 5 release is a great release, and as kind of an alum of that team, I'm excited with what they put out, and I think it's a really good release. It basically delivers on all the promises that we made a year ago when we first kind of unveiled the first preview and first look at it. In terms of a couple other questions people asked was around WPF and Silverlight in terms of futures. One thing that I think that we've talked about over the last year, and I think hopefully you're seeing even more of as some of these products ship, is kind of the support of XAML in multiple different form factors and multiple different ways. And you know, I think a key part of kind of the overall story in terms of kind of the overall roadmap for both Silverlight and WPF is hopefully that you'll see XAML show up in more places and offer a bunch of interesting opportunities with it. I think the biggest one there that we showed off at the Build conference in September is obviously going to be Windows 8. You know, Windows 8 is a major new release of Windows. It's the first release that really embraces tablets in a deep way, and kind of it takes multi-touch and there's some really interesting things with it with Metro. The great thing is you can build those apps using XAML, using .NET, using C#BB, and the languages that you already know. In addition, obviously, HTML5 and JavaScript, as well as C++. Yeah, I think you're going to see a lot of content from us and a lot of energy from us this year as we kind of ramp up for that release and open up the App Store that you can go ahead and start building apps into and make money from. And so anyway, so I think your skills are going to be well served. You can continue to use the Silverlight 5 that just shipped and Silverlight 4 and previous releases. But I think some of the things around Windows 8, some of the things around Windows Phone, and I think going forward are going to provide even more opportunity. And again, the great thing is it lets you use the same skills, the same tools, same languages you already know. Jason asked a question, listen to a few more Silverlight ones, then I'll get on to some of the server questions. Jason has a question, will Metro Windows 8 remove the ability to deploy Silverlight applications? No, definitely not. Silverlight runs great on Windows 8, and so yeah, you can definitely continue to build Silverlight applications that run in the browser on Windows 8. You can also run them on the desktop in Windows 8 as well. Let's see. Charles asked a question, we were working on a Silverlight 4 app. When a user with Silverlight 5 runs our app, we found some issues with controls from the Silverlight toolkit. What's the best way to manage that? Send me a mail, Charles, and I'll hook you up with the team and be happy to connect you with someone to investigate. I don't know the specifics of that, but happy to help with that. Let's see. Other questions. So they asked a question. You talked about desktop-based Silverlight WPF app working in ARM Windows 8 computers. I can't, unfortunately, go into too much details around the ARM plans with Windows 8. I need to kind of defer to the Windows team because that's their product, and I want to be careful not to talk about it without them. So, unfortunately, I can't go into any details on there. The Windows 8 team is probably the best team to ask that specific question. Let's see other questions. Leanne asked the question, will the next version of SharePoint support Silverlight or XAML? Believe so, yeah. The current version of SharePoint supports Silverlight and XAML. The next version of SharePoint obviously will continue to do that. I don't think they provided all the details around what the next release of SharePoint contains, but there's a lot of really good stuff coming out as part of that. Other questions. So let me go back to do some server ones. A few people have asked questions around, HTML5 and Silverlight in terms of, so hopefully, as I talked about earlier, Silverlight just shipped. It's a great release, and it's going to build apps for it for the next decade, and be really successful. A few people have asked, sort of, hey, ASP.NET versus Silverlight versus HTML. Where should I, should I learn HTML and ASP.NET, or should I build an app as Silverlight WPF? In general, I say that's a pretty broad question that's hard to answer. I know people would like a simple, one-sentence answer. But the reality is, I think those are all great technologies. There's certain things that you can do today with XAML and with rich client-side code that you can't do today with a browser. And so if you're doing one of those scenarios, that's one of the reasons why we built XAML, we built Silverlight, we built WPF, is it sort of enables those types of capabilities and power. And so that's one of the unique things that it provides and why it exists. And even in the Windows 8 timeframe, you'll see there's a bunch of great power and capabilities that you can do with obviously Metro apps in general, and we think that those have some unique capabilities in terms of user experience and integration into Windows 8 that those things provide. You can also obviously do lots of things in the browser, so we love the browser too. And what we're trying to do is make sure with ASP.NET and our server-side assets that we have the best back-end for building both browser-based apps as well as client-based apps, whether that's WPF, Silverlight, or Metro. In terms of does it make sense to learn ASP.NET? I think so, in the sense that it gives you something else in terms of your arsenal, and it gives you a really powerful back-end that your client apps can call. One of the things you'll see that we'll be talking more about in the months ahead is some of the new features of ASP.NET, including richer web API support that is going to enable you to build backends that expose not just HTML, but also are increasingly used, we think, for exposing data as well as services that can be easily consumed from a variety of clients, including both HTML5 with JavaScript, as well as Silverlight, as well as WPF, as well as obviously Metro apps and any other client technology. And so, I think there's good stuff to learn in ASP.NET, but I don't get the message to go out and learn it immediately. I think it's something that there's a lot of power to as well, and can help round out your overall technology. Okay, so those are a couple of client questions. We'll come back to the server one a little bit later, or come back to the client one a little bit later on, but I'm going to try to answer a few server ones now at a time here. Let's see. Couple server questions. Maxim asked the question, what's the greatest features we should expect from the next version of the .NET framework? It's a good question. There's lots and lots of good stuff coming as part of the next release in the .NET framework. In some ways, the .NET framework now has so many capabilities, it's sort of, the question is really which area do you focus on when talking about the next set of releases? We talked a little bit about the client a few minutes ago. Let me spend a little bit of time talking about some of the things that are coming out of the server. In general, the next release of .NET, we're calling .NET 4.5, has a ton of new improvements for, again, both client and server apps, but specifically on the server side, you'll see some really nice improvements with ASP.NET. We're shipping in ASP.NET 4.5 a bunch of really powerful capabilities. They range from productivity improvements around data, around scripting, around resource bundling, so things like minification and bundling of JavaScript files, which improves performance. Lots of new improvements around data in general and data controls, strongly typed control templates, a bunch of tooling improvements, and in general, just sort of a bunch of improvements that apply to all things in web forms and MVC and other types of ASP.NET apps. We're also with ASP.NET 4.5, MVC 4, which is our next major release of MVC, providing a bunch of great support there as well. You'll hear more about that in the months ahead. That includes much richer mobile support. That does include richer HTML5 and JavaScript support. That'll include this web API capability, which we'll be talking about more soon, that enables you to expose programmatic endpoints much easier within your site, take advantage of REST, and build server-based backends that can be used from any type of client out there, whether it's browser-based, Metro-based, Silverlight, WPF, or even iPhone or Android-based. The other thing that I think from a kind of biggest change in terms of how you build your apps, I think one of the other big improvements that's coming as part of the 4.5 release of .NET is support for async. This is kind of a new feature that we're surfacing both from a language perspective as well as making some runtime changes to support. At a high level, the benefit of async, it allows you kind of do things asynchronously in a much cleaner way. From a server perspective in particular, one of the big benefits there is it means that you don't have to block a server thread while you do a long waiting activity. So for example, if you're calling out to a web service or calling out to a network resource, you can basically yield back the thread while you're waiting on the data to return, and then basically we'll reschedule the thread and continue. We've had this in .NET since the beginning, actually, even with ASP.NET 1.0. But it's always been a little hard to use. It's kind of always been an advanced feature. And in general, I'd say when, my recommendation to people in terms of using it was kind of, because it was hard enough to use that unless you really needed it, it wasn't worth doing. Two things have changed. One is there's more and more interesting web services out there on the internet to call, and with latencies for internet services being slightly higher, the need for asyncs increased. The other thing that's been kind of interesting that you'll see as part of this new release that's coming out is we're integrating the concept of async directly into the C# and VB programming languages, which makes it much cleaner and easier to actually indicate that you're going to call something asynchronously. And it basically allows you to write code in a way that frankly looks very similar to synchronous code, but by decorating your code with kind of an async keyword, you're basically telling the compiler, write all of that code that used to be kind of yucky to handle kind of the async waits for me, and then .NET will handle it really efficiently. And I think that's going to be a huge change for the better in terms of .NET programming, and it's a real differentiator versus other frameworks and web frameworks and languages out there. And I think it's going to be hopefully a pretty big thing out there in terms of people using. Talk about ask the question, and a few people asked some more questions about some confusion out there in terms of async programming in ASP.NET MVC. I'm not sure the specific confusion around async, but at a high level in terms of if you wanted to use async inside ASP.NET MVC, with the ASP.NET MVC 3 release, you can do that by deriving a controller from the async controller base class, and then basically you write for your action methods effectively a begin and end statement. And when a request comes in, we effectively initiate the begin method, you do the work, and then you kind of return back and say, okay, I'm waiting on something. And then when that result continues, ASP.NET, the runtime will call your end method or your complete method, whatever it's called exactly, and you can kind of complete and then render back, say, an HTML view. In MVC4, it's a little bit different. One thing that we're going to do is we're going to allow you to write async methods in any controllers. You no longer have to derive from the async controller base class, for example. You can just use the existing controller base class that you most likely use today. And then all you need to do is basically just change the return result of one of your action methods, and you basically have it, instead of returning, for example, an action result, you basically return a task of action result, so task of T or task of action result. And then within your action method, you can mark it as async, and then basically when you call a remote service, you do it just like you do today, except you also then use an await keyword to indicate that this is an async operation. But you still return a view just like you do today, and in general, I think you'll find it feels pretty much like a synchronous view. But now ASP.NET MVC will automatically, when it makes that network request, yield back the work per thread, process another request while we're waiting for the network request to complete, and then basically we'll reschedule the work and return the results. So anyway, hopefully it should be pretty clean. We'll be blogging a lot more about it. Chicharo asked the question, so since you're not leading the ASP.NET team anymore, who should you recommend for people to listen to or subscribe to on a blog perspective to find out more about ASP.NET? Well, good news, hopefully, is I'm still leading the ASP.NET team. Yeah, so the ASP.NET team continues to work for me. They've always worked for me. Even though I do focus more on Azure and some of our server pieces now, the ASP.NET team and the Visual Studio Web Tools team and the IS team and the Web Matrix team and the WCF team and the Workflow and AppFabric and BizTalk and a few others all work for me. And so that hasn't, on the ASP.NET side, that hasn't changed at all. So I have not been blogging as much, mostly because I've been, unfortunately, super busy in the last 6 to 9 months. But I just started blogging again yesterday on a new series on Azure. But you'll continue to see me blog about ASP.NET, and there's a bunch of new blog posts that I've kind of queued up, planning to write over the next couple weeks and months about some of the new ASP.NET features. Other bloggers I recommend reading, obviously Scott Hanselman, and there's a bunch of other great bloggers out there that you can subscribe to for ASP.NET. But hopefully you'll see me I'll be blogging a lot more around ASP.NET as well soon. A few people asked about what's the expected release date of MVC4 as well as the next release of .NET 4. We haven't right now announced a release date yet in terms of when those releases will occur. So unfortunately I can't comment specifically on that. Someone asked, though, will there be a go live license with ASP.NET MVC4? And that I can say yes, we will have a go live license for ASP.NET MVC4. When that ships, we haven't, again, publicly talked about yet, but we are looking to have a go live license for MVC4 before the final release. And we're working as hard and fast as possible to try to get the overall release out soon. Let's see, a couple other server questions here. Danae asked the question, what's the future of ASP.NET? Is web forms going to live? Is with Windows 8 apps, are all going to be HTML5 and JavaScript? Well, yeah, web forms is definitely alive and well. And in the ASP.NET 4.5 release that's coming up, there's a bunch of really good web form improvements. And I started a blog series on that in September if you want to take a look at a few of those improvements. But they range from a lot of nice improvements around data binding, validation, unobtrusive JavaScript support, item templates and control templates and things like that can now be strongly typed, and bundling and minification supported, much better CSS and just sort of overall editing support, event support within, say, for example, the source editor. You can wire up server-side events now without having to flip into the designer. In general, just lots of improvements there. So web forms is getting a lot better. Obviously, MVC is also getting a lot better as well. You asked kind of a question, which is, hey, as more code is going to the client, you know, how do we think about the server and the code you write on the server going forward? And again, you'll hear more about this over the next couple of months as we talk about some of the web API work that we're doing that we're pretty excited about. But basically, one of the things that we're looking to kind of add and integrate into ASP.NET is the ability to publicly kind of expose what we call web APIs, which you can think of it as kind of endpoints within your app that can be programmatically accessed. And that can be done via HTML5 JavaScript. It can also be done via Silverlight or WPF. It can be done, obviously, from Metro apps inside Windows 8. It can even be done from an iPhone or an Android device or Windows Phone device as well. You know, I do think you will see going forward for rich interactive client apps more of a focus where the server in ASP.NET is about exposing data and operations as opposed to necessarily rendering HTML. But good news is we're going to make ASP.NET a great place to do it. And, you know, I think also commonly you'll see a lot of apps be kind of hybrid apps where they return some HTML in some cases, but they also will expose endpoints for programmatic use, say within JavaScript inside a page, and that kind of the ability to use all of those hopefully is pretty powerful. Let's see, do a few more. Someone asked a question, if a browser supports WebSockets and with the introduction of the async support inside ASP.NET, will allow you to build applications based on WebSockets without any ugly workarounds? Yeah, one of the nice features that's coming as part of .NET 4.5 is WebSocket support. That's fully supported inside both ASP.NET and WCF. You know, the nice thing about the support that's being added around the async capabilities is that it allows you to kind of build WebSocket listeners that scale incredibly well. And in general, you know, some of the performance numbers that we're seeing right now inside our labs around scalability for WebSockets and that type of kind of connected scenario, we're seeing some really great numbers, and we think we'll be the fastest backend out there for doing those types of workloads. And so we're pretty excited about that. And yeah, we're going to definitely make it really easy for you to use. One thing I'd recommend taking a look at as well is a cool library called SignalR. It's built by some folks on the ASP.NET team. And it allows you to kind of do connections and kind of push down notifications today, even pre-WebSockets via tunneling, and but in a way that works with all browsers. Going forward, then it'll also integrate with the new WebSocket support that's being added with ASP.NET 4.5, and so it can light up automatically as well if you build an app with it and it gets accessed by a machine that has WebSocket client support. A few other questions on ASP.NET that we'll get to Azure, and we'll go back to the client. A few people asked questions around, Nick asked some questions, will we see some changes in the default membership and role providers in ASP.NET? Yeah, there's a couple of improvements that we're doing, one of which is something that's actually available today that we call the universal providers for ASP.NET. And those are basically new providers for things like membership, role, session state that are a little bit cleaner than the ones that ship in the box. So in particular, they don't require sprocs. And they give you, they're built actually on the Entity Framework Code First work, and it gives you a little bit more flexibility around the schema in your backend databases. And you can install that today via a NuGet package. Going forward, as part of the next release of Visual Studio, Dev 11, we'll actually be wiring up the universal providers by default when you do File a New Project and select an ASP.NET template. And so you can use them today, but you'll see them supported even more going forward. We think that's going to provide kind of a much cleaner way to do that type of integration and have some more extensibility on the back end. Brian asked a question, so how is ASP.NET going to support, plan to embrace HTML5? Is it going to be specifically with web forms, a way to kind of render HTML5 more in the future? Yeah, Brian, that's a good question. One of the things that we are doing as part of the web forms 4.5 releases of ASP.NET is we are updating our markup to output more HTML5 friendly markup by default. And so in particular with things like the validation controls, which today kind of renders some kind of ugly inline JavaScript at times, we're now moving to a much more unobtrusive JavaScript-based approach by default. So the same server-side functionality, but it now renders much cleaner markup. And because it's unobtrusive, you can also wire up your own custom JavaScript and or modify our default behaviors in a pretty nice way. And so yeah, you will see more support there. Randy asked a question, what about data binding in MVC? Any chance that Knockout.js will be incorporated as the standard data binding method? It's a good question, Randy. There's a couple of things that we're doing with the next release of MVC around client-side development. So I mentioned a couple of times earlier on this call this new server-side capability we call Web API. That can be used with any JavaScript framework. So it doesn't require a specific JavaScript client-side library. You can just use the standard, HTTP libraries inside JavaScript. It works great with jQuery, and so it's a really clean way for anyone in the client to basically call the server, get back data, and do something with it. And we kind of fully embraced both REST as well as standard HTTP constructs like HTTP codes to express intent. One of the things that we're then doing also, though, is going to be building up stack on the client from that. So once you have kind of a really nice way that you can do handle certain requests on the server, we want to kind of build some richer client-side framework support for calling them, as well as kind of constructing more complex UI. We're doing a couple of libraries that we will be supporting more in the next release of both MVC as well as ASP.NET Web Forms. Is we will be supporting jQuery Mobile for doing mobile development. So we'll be shipping that in the box. We actually have announced that already previously. And so if you're building a mobile app, whether it's for a phone or whether that's for something like an iPad, I think it's going to be hopefully a pretty clean implementation. Pretty clean story for how you can do both your server endpoints that are addressable, as well as kind of build mobile UI that's touch enabled. What we're also doing then is we are looking at supporting Knockout as an option. You don't have to use it, but for people that don't know, Knockout's a really nice client-side JavaScript framework. It supports the model view model pattern inside JavaScript. It's actually built by someone that's on the ASP.NET team. It's kind of a side project. But we are looking at ways that we can integrate that deeper into ASP.NET and support that as a way if you want to do richer client-side interactivity, that you can do things like data binding and more client-side code that's more maintainable as your app grows as an option as well. But it's not required, but that is something we're looking at investing in and supporting more in the future. So Thomas asked a question sort of related to that. Which JavaScript templating framework would you suggest to use? How's it going with jQuery templates? I recommend, Thomas, if you're building a complex app, I would recommend looking at Knockout. I think it's actually a really good library. You can use it today, and it does support a variety of different templating formats. So you can use jQuery templates. You can also use JS views and a few others. In general, I'd say the overall templating story on the client is kind of evolving. Lots of different frameworks out there, so we're going to try to make sure that we support all of them. One of the things that Knockout does support, which is nice, is kind of data binding on the client. And so regardless of what templating framework you use, and they do have a built-in kind of, do support a variety of different templating formats. That kind of enables kind of nice view binding so that as your data changes, the UI updates. That's a really nice feature as well. Let's see. As he asked the question, is there any plans to replace the ASP.NET runtime so that the whole stack can be tested without running on any web server? The unit testing story has been improved in recent years, but full browser tests are still painful. This is sort of related to someone else asked a question around any plans for kind of a lightweight system.web and or kind of a pipeline that you can easily kind of host within any application. In general, it is something we're looking at. Nothing really to kind of announced just yet, but it is something that we're looking at in terms of are there ways to make it easier to host ASP.NET, primarily for testing scenarios as well as for say embedded scenarios within kind of clients that you want to distribute without necessarily requiring a web server. So there are some things that we're looking at. We're also trying to make sure that with some of our new frameworks and new technologies coming out, that we do continue to make testing even easier. I think the new Web API work that's coming out that we'll be talking about more soon is a good example of that. It makes the testing story for Web API controllers really, really clean, and even introduces kind of a new HTTP request response object that doesn't require mocking in order to actually test, and is kind of a little bit cleaner to construct kind of your unit tests. It also, the web API work is kind of cool in that it's obviously tuned for ASP.NET heavily, so that you can just use it inside any ASP.NET app. But it does also support a hosting model, so that if you want to host it inside a command line exe or within your own testing framework, it's pretty easy to do that. I think you'll see some pretty cool stuff as part of that. Okay, so we answered some Silverlight WPF questions up front, and we went to ASP.NET. Let me move on topic-wise and maybe cover a couple of Azure-related ones, and then I will come back to yet a new topic. Let's see. Actually, Rob asked a question. I'll do one more server one here. Once upon a time, there used to be a .NET profiler. Any hopes that we might see a .NET profiler for ASP.NET again? Actually, there is a .NET profiler. It continues to be there, and there's also now profiling support built into Visual Studio that you can use for both, for any type of app, including ASP.NET. So, yeah, there definitely is profiling support, and we continue each release to make it better. Yeah, so you should be able to use that even today. So send me an email if there's a specific thing that's missing, and we can take a look at it. Let's see. So a couple other ones. Andre asked, getting the go live license for .NET 4.5. Unfortunately, I can't announce when there will be a go live license. I did mention earlier we will have one for MVC4, and I believe we're also looking to have one for .NET 4.5, but we haven't announced any dates yet for that. So I'll blog about it as soon as one is available, though. Let's see. Let's do a couple of other ones here. Let's do a couple of Azure ones. So, Frank asked a question, could I only use the Azure CDN for my blobs, pictures, JS, and CS files, and program against it on my current MVC app, which runs on our own servers? Lots of customers are located in the UK, and I think we can select the server locations. It's a good question. I don't know right now how easy. So you can certainly upload files into blob storage for Azure, and enable the Azure Content Delivery Network against that. And some of our new pricing that we've released as part of the CDN recently, we think makes it really cost effective to do that. If you go to the Azure.com website and click on the Develop tab and then click on .NET, there's now a new using the CDN guide that's available on the left-hand side near the bottom that you can read to look at to learn how to actually wire up the CDN. But even if your app isn't hosted on Azure, I believe you can still upload content into the Azure Blob storage and wire up the CDN for it. And so your app can continue to run in servers that are in the UK, but you can use our CDN to host the static content. And generally, because our CDN has, I think, either 24 or 28 locations around the world, you can get some really nice performance wins for anything that's geo-based as part of that. Let's see, Azure questions. Matt Cowan asked a question about NoSQL, and is there specific NoSQL story brewing within Microsoft? So for people that don't know about NoSQL, it's some people call it new SQL, NoSQL, non-relational SQL, but at a broad level, basically, it's a way to do kind of data and store it either in a document-based format or kind of a key value-based format, where there aren't relations necessarily between the entities or between the tables. There's a number of great sort of implementations out there. If you're interested in a .NET one, RavenDB is a really good one that Warren's been working on that provides a really nice base story. Matt asked the question is, what's Microsoft doing in that space? We haven't announced anything yet, but it is obviously something we're going to continue to keep a close eye on. We do have, as part of Windows Azure, something called the Azure Table Storage or Table Services provider, which does give you kind of a way to do unstructured key value pair storage. So that is available today. We don't yet have an on-premise server that gives you that, but again, it's something we're going to continue to watch the market and look at in the future. Let's see. Charles asked a question, what's the best place for learning Azure? Do you recommend any books? I recommend the best place to learn Windows Azure is, keep an eye on my blog. I'm going to be blogging a lot more about Windows Azure over the weeks ahead. But you can also go to the windowsazure.com website, and we have a bunch of tutorials and a bunch of videos that are up there. And in general, you're going to see content continue to kind of come up there over the next couple of months, and see that content get richer and richer. Let's see a few other Azure questions, then I'll come back and do some more server ones. Stefan asked a question, why is a credit card required for setting up an Azure account, even if you have a MSDN subscription? It's a good question. It's something that we debate quite a bit. I'd love to see a no credit card option for Windows Azure at some point in the future. Most of the reason why we haven't right now is one of the challenges that you have in the cloud space in general is because there's a lot of power and a lot of things you can do with it. You can spin up a lot of resources, you can store a lot of data. We do have issues, unfortunately, with fraud where people try to do malicious things or things they shouldn't be doing. And so one of the reasons why we do have a credit card even for the free trial right now is as a way to actually authenticate that the user is who they say they are. We also look at a phone number. As we have some kind of fraud heuristics that we use to kind of assess whether someone's a potential fraud risk, and if they are, we just make sure that they don't spin up tons of resources immediately and or do bad things. We found it's a good way to kind of mitigate misuse of the system. But it is something, as we kind of continue to kind of improve our overall fraud detection capabilities, that we'll look at as potentially removing in the future. But right now we don't have any plans to do it. A couple other quick Azure questions. AJAX asked the question, what is the future of AppFabric? So AppFabric's a set of technologies that's part of my team now. Previously, actually, I never managed until the last 6 months things like WCF, AppFabric, and Workflow. Those were actually in a separate team, but now I actually do. I think there's a bunch of great things coming out with AppFabric that you'll see in the months ahead. I'm pretty bullish in terms of the capabilities that the team's working on. You're going to see lots of improvements around the cache. This is something that we've already shipped a V1 release of, and a V11 release actually right before the holidays. And you'll continue to see a bunch of improvements around scalability, scale out, and performance around caching. There are also, we have a capability called Service Bus that is on Windows Azure today. And it enables kind of a bunch of great connectivity solutions within your application. For example, you can do what's called a relay. So if you want to integrate between a cloud-based solution and apps on-premise, you can do it. It supports pub/sub as well as queuing capabilities. And one of the things that we announced right before the break is some B2B, so business to business, as well as EAI integration capabilities. And you're going to see Service Bus continue to get richer. Lots more features in the AppFabric space as well. And I think you're going to find that they provide some really powerful middleware capabilities that you can use. Alexander asked a question, will there be a basic Azure account for developers free of charge anytime soon? A couple things I'll be blogging about, Alexander, one is there is a free trial that's available today, and there is the free trial gives you basically 3 months of usage where you can use kind of the full Azure in its entirety. We have added a bunch of features as part of the December release that extend the free trial in interesting ways. I'll be blogging about that probably later this week a little bit, some of the details there. The other thing that we have done is if you're an MSDN user, you can basically, as part of your standard MSDN account, you actually get compute as well as storage resources. And so if you have an MSDN account, you can sign up for Azure. And this is not a trial. This is actually, well, as long as you have an MSDN account, you can basically host apps at no charge on top of Windows Azure. Different MSDN account subscriptions have different levels of service. So like I think a professional account gives you like 375 hours of a standard VM, which is enough that if you wanted to run an extra small VM 24/7, you could do it. The premium MSDN subscription gives you 375 hours, or 350 hours, sorry, of Azure hours, which gives you, again, a full-time small VM or 2 extra small VMs, and so on up the stack. So you can also use an MSDN account today to basically host apps and do development on Azure completely for free. We are looking at in the future, how do we make it even more cost effective? And so, you're going to continue to see us focus on that in the months ahead. Let's see, there's a few Azure questions. Let me see if I do one more Azure question, then I'll come back and start answering some non-Azure questions. First of all, I'll ask a question. I'd like to know your thoughts on using AppFabric as a network cache versus installing AppFabric directly on web servers alongside ASP.NET. So one of the things you can do with AppFabric is the caching server. You can basically install it on your web server. So for example, let's say you have 2 web servers or 3 web servers. Let's keep it simple. Let's say you have 4 web servers. You could basically, if you wanted to allocate, let's say, 500 megs of RAM on each of your web servers, and then basically you could have a 2 gigabyte cache that was available from all the web servers that you could store items inside. And so that's an option that the AppFabric cache server supports today. What you can also do is you could stand up instead a cache server or a set of cache servers on the back end separate from your web server and use those as well. In general, both are great options. The high-level thoughts I'd have would be, where possible, it's useful to have at least 2 servers running the cache, because that way, if for some reason the server goes down, you don't lose your cache. AppFabric also has some nice features where you can replicate cached items across multiple nodes or multiple cache servers. So also, if you're bringing a cache server down for maintenance, or it has a failure and crashes, or the server goes bad, the nice thing about it is your cache. Not only is your cache server, you have another cache server you can hit, but that cache server also already has the data stored on it. And so, that's something to think about. Whether or not you store the cache server on your actual web servers or not often depends on how much, frankly, RAM you're using on your web servers. For example, if you have a 4 or 5 gigabytes of RAM on your web server and you find that your app's only using, say, 2 or 3 gigabytes of it, then I think running your cache server on your web server is a totally fine option. If you have the hardware and the memory to spare to run it on a dedicated server, well, that can give you just more predictability and make it even faster as well. So both are perfectly fine options. So let's do some non-Azure, non-ASP, and non-Silverlight WPF, and then we'll come back and hit some of the other ones as well. Let's see. Dan asked the question, will the next release of VS still be based in WPF or another flavor of XAML? Yeah, Dan, the Dev 11, which is in developer preview mode today, is still written in WPF, and will be for the foreseeable future. There's no plans right now to change that. So I asked the question, can you target a tablet PC with Windows Phone 7.5's operating system? Answer is no. Windows Phone is really designed purely for phones. Windows 8, which is our new version of Windows, supports tablet hardware. And one of the things you'll find is that they share kind of a common Metro design language across them, so they feel familiar. But they're each tuned for the specific scenario. So Windows 8 is really designed and will be a great tablet operating system. Windows Phone 7.5 is obviously focused on phone devices. They both support XAML, and one of the things that we showed at the Build conference in Stephen Slafsky's keynote is, how you can actually use Animal. And he actually started off with a Silverlight app running in the browser on Windows 7, and showed how you could take that same XAML and a lot of that same code and run it both for Windows 8 for tablet and touch and Metro, and then also I think they also showed it running on Windows Phone 7.5 as well. Someone asked a question about the future of the Bing Map Silverlight control. Unfortunately, to be honest, I don't know the answer of the Bing Maps control, what Bing is doing. So I don't know of any plans to change that. If you send me out and try to find out specifics. Eldon asked a question, when a Microsoft meeting technology fails for a public event with an MS corporate VP, how many managers will feel the heat? So yeah, a few people noticed that I was having trouble connecting the live meeting at the beginning of this meeting. I don't know if that was actually live meeting's fault. We're having kind of an unusual day today where it's snowing in Redmond, and so I'm pretty much the only person I think connected to or in my building right now. I think the problem I actually ran into was the fact that we have like 80,000 employees that are all trying to hit the same proxy server. So as soon as I changed my proxy server, it worked. So it wasn't actually the live meeting team's fault. So part of that. Paul asked a question, Node.js on Azure. What advantages does it offer, and is there any extra tooling coming in VS for it? Yeah, one of the things I probably might have noticed is that we shipped a Node.js SDK for Windows Azure in December, and you can use that in order to actually build and deploy Node.js apps on Azure. That SDK also supports the ability to run Node.js just on IIS as well. And there's some cool stuff that my team's actually worked on, which integrates Node within IIS. So basically what that means is that you can run it on a web server, and you can integrate it within your existing web content. Right now there's no plans to add additional tooling support for it within VS. Instead, typically what we find is people that are building Node apps use kind of text editors. So if you want to use Notepad, Notepad2, Sublime, Vim, whatever your favorite text editor is, you can use that. And our SDK is kind of designed around enabling that in a pretty clean way. In terms of what Node provides, well, I mean, if you're a Node developer, you're interested in writing Node, then that's kind of the main benefit of the Node.js for Azure SDK. And it kind of lets you take advantage of some of the goodness of Azure, so things around deployment and the ability to kind of have staging and production branches that you can switch back and forth from, and some of the upgrades and some of the reliability benefits, all of which you can do with .NET obviously as well. In terms of kind of, and so that's kind of why you could use it. We generally want to make sure Azure works great for all languages. Scotty asked the question, do I have plans to visit the UK again in the near future? I hope so. I will probably certainly be doing a trip later this spring to the UK. Don't have it booked or planned yet, but we'll likely be doing one there soon. I will be doing, and I'll probably blog about it soon, I will be doing a trip to Belgium and the Netherlands next month as part of the Dutch Dev Days and Belgium Dev Days events. And so I will be in those countries speaking, and I'll be doing kind of a two-part talk on Windows Azure, as well as first look at some of the exciting stuff coming with MVC4. We've actually already shipped a developer preview for MVC4, but I'm going to be doing a breakout talk that will actually show new stuff that isn't quite public yet. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'll obviously be blogging details around that as well for people that can't attend. Greg asked a question, can I share the VS11 ship schedule, and so forth. Unfortunately, Greg, I can't. I wish I could, but unfortunately, I can't. But we're working hard on Dev 11, and we're going to try to ship it as fast as possible. It's going to be a great release, but we haven't announced any dates yet as part of that. Jeffrey asked a question, is WPF going to stick around? What's the future hold specifically? WPF is sticking around. It's fully supported in Windows 8. Dev 11 is built on it. And so it definitely is sticking around, not going anywhere. We do have a bunch of new features that are coming as part of the WPF 4.5 release, and some nice improvements coming with it as well. So yeah, it's totally safe to bet on. And again, as part of kind of the XAML family, one of the nice things about it is, you know, a lot of the same XAML capabilities are available for Metro-based apps, and kind of obviously in addition to Windows Phone apps as well. Let's see. Matthew asked a hard question, which is, hey, I'm worried, you know, the last year in terms of how do I make sure that we continue, how do we make sure that we reduce the risk of Microsoft technologies becoming career dead ends? It's a good question. It's a fair question. You know, I'd say certainly from our perspective, one of the things that we're trying to do is make sure, that you know, the Microsoft, being a developer on the Microsoft stack is hopefully, you know, trying to make it the best as possible. And you know, I think hopefully with some of the things that are coming out over the next year, as well as some of the things that we've shipped over the last 2 or 3 years, that you know, we're working hard on that, and you know, I'm really excited about some of the technology that's going to be coming out. In terms of kind of from a roadmap perspective, you know, the other question around here is sort of how do you make sure that your skills remain relevant kind of as technology evolves and as kind of new platforms and new scenarios emerge. In general, I'd say that's something else that we've tried to focus hard on, and you know, I think you know, if you look at some of the things that we've done, let's say around XAML with Metro-based apps for Windows 8, that's an example of a very new scenario that you know, is touch enabled, it's tablet enabled, it's a new experience, it's a new shell, it's a new UI, and you know, one of the things we've done as part of it is made sure that not only for XAML and .NET developers, but also for HTML and JavaScript as well as for C++ developers, that we have a really nice on-ramp from any of those 3 very different backgrounds to build those types of apps. So you can use the same, you know, you can use Visual Studio just like you do today. You can use whatever language you want, whether it's C#BB, whether it's .NET, whether it's JavaScript, whether it's C++, and you can use whatever kind of markup or presentation format that you want. Now, obviously, there's net new things as part of Metro about Windows 8, so the experience of how you build these types of apps is quite different. But we try to make sure that you can reuse the same core set of skills that you already have in the same languages and tools you're familiar with. And so that's something philosophically we try to focus on. I'd say also on the Azure side, we focused a lot on enabling you to take your .NET skills and easily build cloud-based applications, whether they're web-based, compute-based, or what have you. Again, makes it very easy for you to take your skills and apply. The industry as a whole is changing, and frankly, it's changed for the 20 or so years that I've been part of it. I wouldn't say it's changing more now than it has in the past. I'd say it's maybe it is changing more now than it has in the past. But in general, the industry's always been fairly dynamic, whether it was GUI, whether it was object-oriented, whether it's web, whether it's devices. Who knows what it'll come next. So I think the other thing that we try to do, in addition to trying to make sure our technologies evolve nicely and that you can use the same skills, is also recommend as a developer, make sure you're looking across our portfolio suite. And so, if you're a ASP.NET developer, hey, it's great to learn, client-side code as well. If you're a client-side developer, it's great to learn ASP.NET as well. That just makes you a better developer in general. Let's see. Elijah asks, do you have any comment on the .NET is dead debate? I don't think it's dead. I think hopefully the best is yet to come. When I look at some of the stuff that my team's shipping over the next couple of months, I feel pretty bullish in terms of what you're going to be able to do with .NET and the future of it going forward. Let's see. quick, let me hit a couple other quick questions. We've asked a question about supporting Indic languages on Windows Phone 7 and Windows 8. To be honest, unfortunately, I don't know the the current status of Indic languages. If you send me a mail, I can try to find out for you, though. Josh asked the question, will IE10 still support browser plugins such as ActiveX, Silverlight, and Flash? The answer is yes. When you're running IE10 inside the Windows 8 desktop or running IE10 on Windows 7, then all existing plugins just continue to work, including Silverlight and Flash, so there's no changes there. When you're running in the Metro, which is kind of the touch-optimized experience, I believe the plan is that plugins are not supported, but I point you to the Windows blog, has more details on that. But absolutely, the scenarios that you're using today, and that's one of the things that we showed at the Windows 8, the build conference, with Windows 8, you can absolutely, in your desktop browser, continue to use, well, all apps, both desktop apps as well as apps that run in the browser, including plugins. What features am I most excited about releasing for Azure this year? Matthew asked. There's a lot of cool stuff that we're doing that I can't talk about just yet, but I'm pretty excited about Azure in general. Some people know we did a pretty big release of Azure this December, and that's sort of one of the things I'll be blogging a little bit about over the next couple of weeks is some of those improvements that generally I think improve the usability of Azure and significantly improve the on-ramp billing and a bunch of nice capabilities. You're going to see a lot more stuff coming over the next couple months, and even more kind of capabilities and improvements. And so I'd say the things I'm most excited about yet, we have not talked about yet, and hopefully as soon as we show them to you, you'll be excited too. Let's see. Today I asked a question, will EF have Enums support out of the box? It's a good question. I don't know. I don't actually manage the EF team, so I'm not 100% sure. If you send me an email, though, I'd be happy to follow up for you and find out. Ken asked a question, are there APIs for how you plan to address code redundancy for validation so that when you need to validate input with business objects, but also want to run that validation interactively on the client, how can you do that? Well, one of the things that we're doing, Ken, is we started it out with MVC 2, I think, and it's got richer with MVC 3, and you'll see it even richer with MVC 4, is added support for declarative validation objects, or validation attributes that you can apply to members of business objects that do allow you to run client-side code, and basically allow you to kind of decorate the validation rules on your objects as kind of a cross-cutting concern, so that you're not having to rewrite code in multiple places. And so we are trying to make it easier for you to apply validation rules and have them enforced both in client-side JavaScript as well as in the server as well. Craig asked a question, Scott, do you know of any improvements with NMS Test in the next release of Visual Studio? I believe there's a bunch of improvements coming in testing with the next release of Visual Studio. In fact, I know there is. I don't know what we've publicly talked about yet, so I need to be a little careful with how I answer that question. If you send me an email, though, I'd be happy to connect you with the team. I just want to make sure I don't inadvertently talk about a new feature that I'm not supposed to just yet. But if you send me mail, I can definitely connect you with the team, and they'll know for sure kind of what they can talk about now versus in a little bit. Let's see. Rob asked the question, what's the future of the AJAX control toolkit versus jQuery-based controls? The AJAX control toolkit we're continuing to ship regularly. I think we do kind of updates on it now like every other month. So we're continuing to update it. You know, in general, I'd say we're continuing to make improvements to it and obviously continue to fix bugs and improve performance with it. a lot of our kind of future focus on JavaScript has kind of evolved a little bit more to be less server-side controls and that emit JavaScript and more places where you do write some client-side code, either with jQuery, or I mentioned earlier in this talk, we're supporting both jQuery mobile as well as Knockout in deeper ways in the future as well, which are kind of more client-side frameworks. But that doesn't remove the need for the AJAX control toolkit, and we're going to continue to improve the AJAX control toolkit as well. You'll just probably see a little bit more emphasis on pure client-side JavaScript that integrates with the server, as opposed to server-side controls that emit JavaScript. But we're definitely continuing to focus on the AJAX control toolkit, making improvements to it as well. Let's see, other improvements. So someone asked, I asked someone asked a question earlier about Enums, and Jeffrey Sylvan helpfully pointed out that EF5 Beta 1 actually will support Enums, and there's an ADO.NET blog post from this January 12th. So ADO.NET team blog post January 12th talks all about it. So thank you, Jeffrey, for catching that. So yeah, it looks like we will support Enums. Paresh asked the question, any plans to support OpenID? Generally, a lot of people often ask, what about just OAuth in general, OpenID, things like that? Are we making it easier? I believe, yeah, the next release of ASP.NET is making it easier to support OpenID and just sort of OAuth-based communication in general. Steve Shepard asked, what's the recommended hardware setup for new technologies? That's a hard one. A lot depends on kind of the devices you're going after. So obviously, if you want to target slates and tablets, then a touch-enabled device certainly helps. But in general, usually faster the better. No, I don't know. I'm about to get a new laptop. I'm finding myself, I like to develop on a big screen. So personally, I'm excited about some of the new Thunderbolt technology coming out, and so I'm looking forward to a point where I can maybe get a Thunderbolt-enabled laptop and display it on a giant 30-inch screen. That looks pretty good to me, just because I like maximizing screen real estate. But at the same time, I today do all my development on the laptop because I like the portability. So I wish I had a better answer. Rick asked the question, is there something in your mind you recommend developers in the Microsoft stack to learn? Something they must know, like XAML or WCF, etc. In general, I'd say the most important thing from a developer perspective is to probably say broad and do a little bit of everything, and then focus on the things that you really need. If you have spare time and you want to learn new stuff, I'd say also pick an area that you think is going to be a growth opportunity for your career in the future, and invest some time in that if you can. So, if you're interested in cloud-based computing, I think that's something broadly everyone's going to benefit from and use going forward. Then, selfishly, I think Windows Azure would be a great thing to learn, and you can learn from it just by keeping an eye on my blog. Or, if you want to do phone development, or I think also for client development, I think obviously Windows 8 and the new Metro work that's coming out is also going to be hugely valuable. And so even if you're building browser-based apps or the client-based apps, smart client-based apps today with WPF for Silverlight or ASP.NET, keep an eye on Azure on the back end, keep an eye on Metro and/or phone. Even if it doesn't directly apply to your job, those are areas where you can leverage a lot of the stuff you'll learn even in your existing job. And at the same time, I think you'll find that you can reuse your skills, and they'll also improve your skills and let you do even more going forward. Well, I'll ask a question. Do you know what Microsoft is doing with WebSockets and the standards? Are they actively involved? Yes, absolutely. We're very actively involved as part of the WebSocket standards. IE10 will support WebSockets, and in general, .NET 4.5 and IIS 8 and ASP.NET 4.5 and MVC 4, are all kind of embracing WebSockets in a pretty deep way. And so, yeah, we're definitely involved in doing a lot with that. Ryan asked a question, what's your #1 tool in your toolbox outside of VS? Ooh, that's a good question. What's my #1 tool? I don't know. One of the things I'm trying to do is I'm using different things, and so I'm trying to think, what's my #1 tool? So much of what I do is dominated by VS, so it's sort of like 99% of my time is spent in VS, so it's hard to, what's that 1%? Generally, a couple of things that I'm spending more time on trying to learn is, one is, looking at different text editors and kind of using new key bindings. So that's one of my kind of New Year's resolutions. I've been using Vim as kind of a text editor for doing things like just even writing blog posts recently. As a way to kind of build some muscle memory in terms of pure keystroke. There's a good Vim and VI key binding extension for VS, in fact, so if you want to use those key bindings, you can within Visual Studio. So that's something I'm trying to learn. In general, I'm trying to push my team to be kind of more agile, and so I'm also looking at some other tools out there in terms of communication, time management stuff for project management. It's always good to learn new stuff. Let's see. Let me quickly go through a couple other ones here. Thomas' question, what conference would you suggest ASP.NET developers attend this year? Good question. We haven't announced all the conferences that we're doing this year, and so my guess is we'll probably talk more about those in the future. I speak at Dev Connections, which is held twice a year. That's a really good ASP.NET conference, and so there's one coming up in the spring, and then there's usually one in the kind of October, November timeframe. We'll obviously have Microsoft conferences as well, and TechEd, I think they've announced the dates, is coming up in a few months' time. The other thing we're trying to do is have it so that you don't have to necessarily go somewhere in order to learn stuff. And so you're also going to see us both with the ASP.NET website, which we kind of redid in a nice way in December, as well as with things like Azure, providing more online content that you can watch. And so you can also space out your learning over time. Patrick asked a question, what's my perspective on aspect-oriented programming? Good question. I don't know enough about AOP to be to talk intelligently about it. I know people that I respect and love it, and people that I respect that don't like it. So I don't really have a strong opinion. In terms of data center capacity on Azure, we are going to be building out data centers more in the future. And so if you ask about Canada right now, I don't think we've announced anything specific to Canada. We do have 2 data centers in North America already that you can use with good latency from Canada. But going forward, that'll be something that we're going to continue to kind of look at getting more global reach. The future of ARR, the application request routing, we're definitely doing some nice things with the IS ARR feature. And so send me a mail if you have specific questions on that, but you'll definitely see some major improvements coming with it in the months ahead. Stephen asked a question about any updates or new versions of Expression Blend in the pipeline, the HTML5 support. We shipped a version of Expression Blend for Windows 8 at the developer conference, the Build Developer Conference in September. And so we did ship an update there. That's the best one to keep an eye on, and you're going to continue to see improvements coming in the months ahead and improvements there. So point you at the team blog there to learn more. Alex asked the question, will Microsoft release any tools for creating HTML5 web apps that follow the MVVM patterns, like Silverlight with data binding and so forth? One of the things, Alex, that I keep an eye on is the Knockout support that I mentioned earlier. This is something we're integrating into ASP.NET going forward, and it does provide a model view model pattern support for doing client-side JavaScript that you can then you can use it with any web app, but it will specifically integrating it nicely within MVC. One of the things that was mentioned is because we started about 15 minutes late, I'm going to keep going for another 15 minutes. So people need to drop off. Totally understand if you need to, but also I'll keep answering questions if you guys want to stick around. Let's see. Naresh asked a question. I'm using MVC with Razor and EF for developing web apps, but what I miss is good guidance on the architecture of an app, what an application should be. In other words, guidelines for things like repository layer, service layer, etc. Is there a central place to find such info? One of the things that we are focusing on is with things like the patterns and practices guidance, looking at kind of trying to provide better guidance on how to do that. It's something I will follow up with the patterns and practices team in terms of there is I think actually there's a guidance that you just put out called Silk, which does provide some guidance in terms of using MVC with Razor and EF. It also talks a little bit about guidance for building client-side apps that you can use as well. So I recommend looking at the patterns and practices guidance. Dave asked a question, any details about the future of LightSwitch and some of the future plans? Unfortunately, I don't believe that they've talked at all about those, so I can't talk more about that, but I do know we're making some good progress on LightSwitch, and it provides a bunch of great stuff. Yeah, a couple other questions people have asked about future things I can't talk about. Graham asked a question about SharePoint support for Razor. Are there any plans in the future for that? Of course, I can't talk about future versions of SharePoint just because that's not my product, and so I get in trouble whenever I talk about the features of other people's products without them. But I agree that would be cool. Kevin asked a question, how does drag and drop change with Windows 8 and multi-touch? So he currently has a WPF project that currently assumes only a single drag and drop at a time. I believe both for Windows 8 as well as Windows Phone 7, it does support multi-input events. And so you can actually do multiple drag gestures at the same time. But to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. What I'd recommend is maybe you go to the forums for Windows 8. There's some nice developer forums. If you ask a question there, I'm sure someone from the team would help answer it. The details and specifically how to code for that. Rudy asked a question, is there a script-like approach possible while using WWF? Actually, is that workflow? Rudy, if you could do a follow-up and ask a question specifically there, is that around workflow or something else? And specifically the scripting hook you're looking for, and I can answer that. Phil Glossner asked a question, will the in-house Metro apps run on Windows 8 without certification by Microsoft? Will they work over the web? I'm going to point you, Bill, at the Windows 8 team blog, as well as they have some blog posts around the App Store that's coming, the marketplace that's coming with Windows 8, and they have probably the most guidance in terms of that. Paul St. Amand asked a question, what's the biggest challenge you and your team are trying to solve? It's a good question. I mean, specifically in terms of the things that I'm focusing on the most right now, I'd say in general, the thing that I'm spending kind of all my time, not all my time, but most of my time focusing on right now is kind of Windows Azure. That's been kind of a fun challenge because there's a bunch of technical challenges in terms of how do you provide a service, how do you provide 99.95% reliability, which means that if you're ever down for more than a few minutes a month, you have to pay, give up all the revenue your customers paid you. So that is something that very much focuses our attention. You know, and more generally, how do we build a developer platform with Windows to Azure that makes it really easy for you to build great solutions for it that can really do amazing things. And so, you know, that's a fun set of challenges, both from a technical architecture perspective, from a user experience perspective, and then from an approachability perspective, how do we kind of provide a great environment for that? And so, you know, that's a lot of what my team's focusing on the next couple months. Yeah, I'm having fun with it. It's been really good. I'd say then on the .NET space, you know, I'm also really engaged, even you might not see it on my blog, but in terms of some of the improvements we're making around the new version of ASP.NET, the new version of MVC, some of the new releases that are coming out with WCF, AppFabric, Workflow, etc. Yeah, there's some really cool stuff coming out there. You asked the question, will you continue to invest in table storage with Azure? Yeah, we are continuing to make improvements. One of the big things that we did this past fall was to enable geolocation, or geo-replication, so that things that you store in table storage now by default asynchronously are replicated into another data center. By default, you can turn it off if you want to, but it gives you some really nice reliability benefits. And you're going to continue to see improvements both with table storage and more generally just with sort of unstructured data within Azure as well. Christina asked the question, what globalization localization patterns would you recommend for ASP.NET and MVC? What is the recommended way for globalizing, localizing client-side code resources with JavaScript? It's a good question. If you send me an email, I might actually hook you up with someone on the team that might actually be able to give you better guidance on that, because my experience there is not as deep as I'd like it to be. So if you send me an email, though, I'd be happy to hook you up with the team. My next question, I'm planning to take the current 70-583 exam, which is designing and developing Windows Azure applications. How soon is it planned to be updated to take more advantage of aspects of Windows Azure? I don't actually know, Brian, the status of that exam. So I unfortunately don't know. I don't unfortunately know the status of that. Sorry about that. Julio asked, is there any plan to offer Windows Azure as part of the Windows Phone $700 dev subscription? That's a good question. I don't also know the status of that. I don't believe we currently have plans to do that, but I did talk about earlier, we do have a 3-month free trial for Windows Azure, which I'll blog about more later this week. And we also, if you're an MSDN subscriber, we do include Azure Hours for free as part of that. And so I definitely recommend looking at those two options. If you send an email, you're asking about Windows Azure status in Turkey, be happy to hook you up with some of our folks, and we can try to give you more details on what the ETA is for when Azure might show up in Turkey as well as other countries. Ricardo asked a question about DNAP support in Africa and what the plan is around updating that. Unfortunately, I don't know the current status on because I don't manage that team. So unfortunately, I can't comment on that. Sorry about that. Byers asked a question, will the next release of Visual Studio be available under Website Spark and BizSpark? Yes, they will. If people don't know, BizSpark is a program for startups. Gives you free software for 3 years. Included as part of that is actually Windows Azure Hours, so you can actually run your site as well in Azure, or your app also in Azure. At a much reduced price, or actually free, I think. Website Spark is a program that gives you free software for web development, and so you get Visual Studio as part of that. And so yeah, both the next release of Visual Studio will definitely be supported in both of those going forward. So I had asked a question, how about what's the status of Arabic in Windows Phone? So someone earlier asked me about Indic languages. I unfortunately don't know the status about Arabic either. I hope it comes in the future, but I don't actually unfortunately know the story there. Unsigner asked a question, what in your opinion is the best way for development of the RESTful services in .NET? I mentioned earlier about some of the web API work that we're doing as part of the next set of releases of .NET and ASP.NET and WCF. One of the things we are trying to do is have a really good, clean way to do both RESTful based services, but more broadly kind of web API, regardless of what the protocol is, whether it's JSON, XML, or even custom format that you're creating. And so you'll see a lot more details about that in the months ahead, and that's definitely an area we're investing pretty heavily. Jeff said, I mentioned Knockout several times, which is good, but there are several other JavaScript frameworks out there gaining momentum, especially Backbone.js. Can we read into your statements that is more likely future versions of ES will ship with Knockout and less likely Backbone or others? It's a good question. I mean, in general, the way I'd say we're designing all of our features, we're kind of building them as kind of layers of a cake, and so you can kind of write to any of the layer and not preclude putting alternative layers on top. And so definitely we're going to have it so you can use Backbone against ASP.NET and ASP.NET MVC. So that'll work just great, and we might even ship a project template for that in the future. Right now we don't have plans to, but I certainly expect it to be delivered through NuGet, and we'll make it really easy to do so. Knockout right now, as I mentioned earlier, is something I think we're looking a little harder at using, mostly because we find the usability of it is really nice. We find people find that they can be immediately productive with it quickly, and it does enable some really nice kind of model-view model separation. But we're not saying that we won't support Backbone as well in the future. I'd say right now, though, we do kind of think Knockout looks pretty good, so you will see some stuff there. Rochelle asked about, please blog about ASP and MVC localization with optional JavaScript. Again, unfortunately not a localization expert, but maybe I'll blog about it in the future if I learn a little bit more about it, hopefully. Bart asked a question, who's running the ASP and MVC team right now? Is there a new PM? Kind of as I mentioned earlier, Bart, I actually still run the ASP.NET team, both web forms and MVC and web pages. And so, technically I run it, and have always run it, and continue to run it. In terms of, is there a new program manager? Basically, we have several program managers on the team, and so so we actually have several PMs and devs and tests that work on the project. And Phil Hack, who used to be one of the PMs that worked on MVC, is still very involved in NuGet and also MVC. Obviously, he's kind of slightly different capacity now, but we have several other great people on the team as well. So don't worry, MVC's in good hands. A couple of questions about the Mix conference and what the plan is there. I unfortunately don't run the Mix conference, so I don't know. I don't have any details, unfortunately, to share about the plans there in terms of conferences. Questions, let's see. Scott asked a question, will Silverlight get an integrated unit test story on the VS test system in Visual Studio? I don't know. What I do know is we are supporting the new, what was it called? I know the code name for it. I'm trying to think what the official name is. Portable platform assemblies with Dev 11 going forward. And basically what those do is they allow you to kind of create projects that you can run in other versions. So, for example, I could build an assembly that works both in Silverlight and in .NET and in WPF, client and server. And so one of the things I believe you'll be able to do, Scott, is use our unit testing framework with MS Test to easily write tests against those based assemblies in the future. And so hopefully that will be easier. Charles has a question. Where can I see your resume? I'd like to know your professional background as a sample to follow. Actually, I don't know if I have a resume. It's been a while since I've updated it. Kind of been sort of lucky, unusual in that I actually haven't interviewed for something in like 15 years. So I've done lots of different things, but I've never actually really kept my resume up to date because I might have a LinkedIn profile actually, but it's been a while since I looked at it, so I don't actually even know what's on it. So yeah, so unfortunately I don't have anything written down. The biggest thing I'd suggest for developers is stay passionate, keep learning. There's so much stuff out there to learn, and write code and experiment. So whether you're working on a project, you can carve out just a little bit of time to look at other things. The other thing I often recommend also is push yourself to try to especially if you are working on a project or an area, how can you learn something new and apply it towards what you're currently working on? I find that often is a good way to actually learn something and then immediately start really improving it. Whereas if I just sort of learn something completely on the side, I get value out of that as well, but sometimes I don't take it as seriously, or it doesn't sort of retain the knowledge as much as if I learn it and really apply it. So I mentioned I'm trying to learn Vim key bindings is kind of one of my exercises. As part of that, I'm trying to learn it both using the command line version, but also kind of use the extension that someone's built for Visual Studio. So if I play around with something on the side and then I actually want to also apply it in my day job, I can still exercise that muscle memory there as well. So keep learning, keep having fun, keep being passionate. Myers asked the question, since Microsoft is releasing a lot of open source projects, have you found that internally Microsoft is seeing the benefit of this move? In general, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of one of the reasons why we're doing it. I'd say in general, I pushed kind of open source for a while within Microsoft. I think we can do more than we are today, so I'm not trying to assert that we're doing a ton yet, but it is something I think we're trying to do. I think the biggest benefit is actually less around the legal license of whether or not you ship the code and whether someone can take the code and modify it. I think people often get too hung up on licenses and on that aspect. I think it's more the collaborative aspect and the ability to get feedback faster. And that's something you can do not only with open source, but with other things as well. But that's something that I push pretty hard on my teams, whether it's through previews, whether it's through more collaborative development, whether it's obviously through open source as well. So we're way over time. Let me answer 2 or 3 more questions. Let's see. Johan asked, I think this is the first question. So, Johan asked, will the .NET Framework MVC be available for SharePoint, MVC4? I unfortunately don't know the details. I don't think I can comment about that plans yet because it's a different team building it. But I agree that would be nice. Dan asked a question, can I hint about future releases of Silverlight? Again, I don't run that team anymore, and so I need to be a little careful about not disclosing other teams' roadmaps. So I apologize, I can't say more there. Doug asked, what do you think about the future of CoffeeScript? I don't know, I'm torn on CoffeeScript. I think for people to know it's a language that compiles down into JavaScript. There's parts that I like, at the same time it is a little bit removed from what's really happening under the covers, and so there's some concerns there. I think syntactically the language looks kind of cool though. I don't have a strong opinion one way or another. I need to build something with it to learn more. Rick did ask a question, where can we go to learn more about the future of Silverlight? I know it's not part of your team anymore, but is there someone we should be looking at? I'd recommend, keep an eye on the Silverlight website, Silverlight team blog. I know that they continue to post more, and so you can definitely keep an eye on there. And then, the other thing I'd recommend is, as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, or 90 minutes, think about also the XAML family in general as being part of kind of a key part of the story going forward. And so, the ability to kind of use the same XAML assets and the same skill set that you use today for building it in the browser. How do you apply it towards Metro apps on Windows 8? How do you apply it towards Metro apps for Windows Phone 7? I think that's also going to be a part of the roadmap and a key part of the overall story. One last question. Matthew asked a question, after the next release of Windows Server ships, what cloud capabilities will exist only on Azure and not on-premise? It's a good question. I mean, in general, kind of, Matthew, I'll be talking more about that as part of my overall blog series on Azure. But one of the things we are trying to do is get more symmetry between our on-premise products with Windows Server and SQL and obviously .NET, as well as with our cloud products with Windows Azure. And so, over time, you're going to see kind of more and more symmetry so that you can basically use the same APIs, the same set of features in both places. We haven't published exactly the roadmap in terms of, full convergence, but that kind of generally is kind of the overall philosophy we're trying to do, make it more similar where it makes sense. There are some places where it doesn't make sense, where there are kind of unique things that are cloud-specific or on-premise specific, so you'll never have kind of complete fidelity there. But in general, our goal is to kind of get convergence and enable you as a developer to build apps that run in both places, and that more importantly can take unique advantage of both places and have one set of skill set that maps to both. So you'll see more and more about that over the next couple of months and frankly a couple of years as kind of we drive towards that. So unfortunately, I think we're out of time, and so I apologize if didn't get to your question, but I'm going to be doing these things, keep doing these things pretty regularly, and so if I didn't get to it this time, hopefully I'll get to it next time, and the chance to keep pushing on that. So I want to thank everyone for coming here and joining the talk today, and really look forward to hearing you. I will post a link to this recording once it's available on my blog post that I did last week about this event, so you can download it and listen to it offline later if you started late or you wanted to re-listen to a certain question. And again, I want to thank everyone for both joining and then also for using the products that college students are joining, in particular .NET, Visual Studio, and maybe a few Azure users as well. And I think you're going to hopefully see some exciting stuff with all of them going forward. So thanks a bunch.
Thank you very much, Scott. Yet another fantastic presentation and Q&A session from you. I think this is probably one of the #1 sources at the moment to get the answers to many questions right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. This was your 10th event with us, and I would like to thank you very much for all the time you put aside for coming into our members and answering all of their questions. And as you said, definitely look forward to the ones in the upcoming years. Quickly to everybody, I want to just remind everybody that those that had registered and attended the event and is a Lidnug member, we'll be drawing 10 one-month subscriptions to Pluralsight in the next couple of days. Other than that, thank you very much, and thank you for attending. Thank you for to our sponsors for keeping to support us. And remember that there is way more events coming up. So stay tuned and happy 2012.